working classes. You know, those of us in the audience who are probably 50 plus will remember a time when very, very few people worked weekends except for probably the shops. Very, very few people worked overtime.
Women didn't work,
and women didn't work at all. And, you know, there was no shame in being described as a housewife and mother. And in fact, I mean, it was, the whole idea was to nurture the family. That the mother nurtured the family whilst the father was able to work a flat working week of 40 odd hours, 40, 45 hours. And on that wage, he could afford to buy a house. If it wasn't in social housing, could afford to buy a house because there was no real private rental market. It was either you bought the house or social housing. Could keep the family in food, clothing, probably afford a 2-week holiday, not overseas, you know, maybe Clacton or Scarborough or whatever, but a 2-week holiday. But you had the basics. That's gone. That's gone. Because young people today, and I know of one in particular who's just managed to find work, but now he's working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then in a different job, 10 hours a day on Saturday, and I think 7 on a Sunday, and that's just to get enough basically to keep a roof over his head and have a little bit of spending money. And then of course we have the other abomination where you've got the likes of the supermarkets paying people literally minimum wage and then them having to make up their earnings on tax credits. You know, basically there is nothing about this system under the EU that is working for the benefit of the people. And if we stay within the EU, that ain't going to change. In fact, it's very easy to see what the trajectory is. So the only opportunity that we have is to effectively shut this down sooner rather than later. Now this agenda, this immigration agenda, we can trace back to a specific individual. And that individual is called Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. And he wrote a book, the Pan-European Manifesto, in 1922 actually. And in that book, he made the statement, he said that basically the role of a future Europe should be to undermine all national homogeneity, but there should be two elements that protect their bloodline purity, whilst everybody else is intermixed. Any idea what those two bloodline purities might be? No political correctness here, you need to be honest. One is effectively, yes, the Jews, but this is a Zionist agenda, not a Jewish agenda, it's a Zionist agenda. And the other is?
Ateists. Ateists.
Ateists?
Ateists.
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 You're adding to my education, sir. Tell me later. Yeah. It's actually royalty and aristocracy. The royalty and aristocracy. And Coudenhove-Kalergi in this dissertation basically said that the way in future for the traditional aristocracy, i.e. including royalty, and the spiritual elite, and that, I quote, that was his phrase, for the Jewish people, he said the traditional aristocracy and the spiritual elite should maintain their bloodline purity whilst destroying everything else and creating an underclass. Now this, of course it's a perverse view, of course it's a perverse philosophy, but that is the agenda that was created in the 1920s, and it's the agenda that's being pushed through today. And just to spell that out for you, there is a Coudenhove-Kalergi Award. And the Coudenhove-Kalergi Award is given to the European politician who is perceived to have done the most to further this agenda, to undermine the national homogeneity within their country. So it won't surprise you that some of the winners have been Angela Merkel, Rompuy, this socio-psychopathic war criminal, Anthony Charles Lyndon Blair. And if you want to know how he was controlled, then just do a little Google search, and you may have to dig through quite a number of pages, but Google Charles Lyndon. Drop off his first and last name, Charles Lyndon, and you will find...
Toilet affair.
Yes. That he was convicted in Bow Street Magistrates Court of cottaging in 1982, and this is how this socio-psychopath has been controlled by the establishment ever since. And of course, this guy won it twice, and most recently, this guy, Jean-Claude Juncker, former Prime Minister, of course, of Luxembourg, that massive state over in the eastern side of France, and now head of the Commission. So, you know pretty much what's going to happen if we remain in the EU. It's spelled out for us in words of one syllable and by 45 years of experience. And you would think that if they're going to manipulate the vote, they would manipulate it on the basis to keep us in. But consider the possibility. I think the vote is going to be manipulated. I think they're already trying to create a situation where it doesn't need to be manipulated very much, but they will manipulate it if they have to manipulate it. And I think the manipulation is to take Britain out of the EU. And we might say, oh, that's great, you know, that's what you want, Ian. So, you know, why is that a manipulation? Because they will then rely on us being out of the EU to implement legislation that will turn this country into a blatant police state, more than it is right now. That's why this type of legislation is being prepared. The government unveils new counter-extremism bill. It's why I've already been stopped at Exeter Airport back in December by Special Branch, because I'm regarded as a domestic extremist, because I happen to challenge them on fracking. And, you know, of course, they try other means by which to try and neuter activism. Anyone who has the audacity to challenge the establishment view, once this becomes a law, an act rather than a bill, the Domestic Extremism Act, then anybody who dares to challenge the establishment view will run the risk of effectively being labelled a criminal. And as we're finding in Australia right now, in New South Wales, where anybody who protests against the fracking industry there can face up to 7 years in jail. Don't think it's not coming here. So if we come out of the EU, and I think we will, I think there is a very, very good probability, not even possibility, that what we have perceived as austerity over the last few years will seem like a paradise compared to what these guys want to bring in. Because what they're going to try and create is a situation where in 7 to 10 years, the situation in this country is so bad that people are gagging to get back in. But I mean, look at the history. You know, the EU has destroyed Greece, it's destroyed Spain, it's destroyed Italy, it's destroyed Portugal, it's destroyed Ireland. France right now is on the brink of collapse. I mean, who has seen all those BBC news reports on the, the riots kicking off in every French city? I mean, you've seen that on the BBC every night for the last... Oh, no, you haven't. Oh, no, that's right, because the BBC has decided, or somebody has told the BBC, you don't report it. The only way you get to see it is if you watch Russia Today. And who would have ever thought 30 years ago that we'd be tuning to a Russian TV station to get the truth? There's something paradoxical about this. So you know what's coming. And it is spelled out for us. I know those of you who've seen my other presentations will be familiar with this piece of art. Unfortunately, it's not quite in focus here. But this is a piece of art that was used in Ireland, in France, and in the Netherlands when they had their referenda on whether or not to remain in the EU. And of course, it didn't really matter what the result was, because in France and the Netherlands, basically the government said, well, thanks for letting us know what you think, but we're staying in anyway. Which, of course, the British government may also try and do. in Ireland, they just made them keep voting until they came up with the right answer. But here you've got there's so much in this artwork, we could talk about this for an hour. But here's the Tower of Babel. Yeah, the Bruegel artwork, which of course the Strasbourg Parliamentary Building is based upon, so there's your clue. But in this artwork, what we see here is these two guys looking longingly across the moat into the inner sanctum of the tower. And these are the guys that have sold their soul. The Tony Blairs of this world, the David Camerons of this world, the George Bush of this world. They're not part of the inner circle, the inner sanctum, but they've done everything that they were instructed to do in return for what's Tony Blair's estimated net worth now, 60 million? Yeah? Well, he didn't have that when he left office, so, you know, he's getting his due rewards. He'll get his due rewards, I think, in the afterlife. Anyway, so here we have these guys looking across longingly. You know, what have they got to do to get inside? And of course, they never get inside. And then here we have the proletariat, the masses here. And they are depicted as blockheads. They are all depicted as squareheads. And basically, this is what, you know, the establishment are saying. That, you know, this is how they regard the masses. But they know that every child that is born into humanity actually does arrive in this physical realm with the potential to access everything. Everything that they have the capacity to access. In terms of the left brain, i.e., you know, the relationship with the physical, empirical, material realm, and the right brain, everything else, all that is. And they want to shut that down. They want to shut that down. And of course, you know, again, it's a long discussion as to how they're doing that, but of course the vaccines, the food, the aerial spraying, the geoengineering, the fluoride in the water, it's all contributing to that. This is a piece of artwork from Brick Lane back in 2012, showing the bankers literally playing their game of global monopoly on the backs of humanity. So, we are coming up against what is quite probably the most fundamental decision that this country, the people of this country, have ever had to make. It was a fundamental decision back in 1975, but we were lied to. We were lied to. And, you know, we didn't have the access to the internet. We were totally reliant on whatever it was the mainstream media was pumping out. And so we, including me, fell for it hook, line and sinker. This time there's no excuse. Because not only is the information freely accessible, we've got 45 years, or 43 years of history. So we can see what the trajectory will be. So, over the next, not even 2 weeks now, is it? Over the next 12 days, our challenge is to try to encourage people to look at this for themselves. Because, as we all know, you know, you can talk to people until you're blue in the face, and it's not going to have any impact. But if you can sow a seed, if you can stimulate their own curiosity to look at this for themselves, then hopefully they will come to their own realization that the only decision that is going to have any benefit for the British people and future generations of all the people who live in this country. And I completely understand, by the way, why it is that people want to come to this country. And I hold nothing against them for wanting to make the effort to come here. Because if you imagine a situation where there was a country, okay, one that doesn't exist, but if there was a country out there where you could go and work as a bus driver and earn £3,000 a week, would you do it? £3,000 a week, £12,000 a month for driving a bus. That's about 6.5, 7 times the average wage in this country, i.e. about 6.5, 7 times what a bus driver earns in this country. Yet that's what the people that are coming here are doing. You know, they're coming from their countries where the economy is such that to come here and earn £22,500, £25,000 a year is 6, 7 times what they can earn in their own country. So of course they're going to come here. And I don't hold anything against them, you know, for that. They just want to better themselves and a lot of their family. Because they've only got to send home probably even 1/3 of what they earn here, and their family will still be better off than if they were working in their home country. But we've got to be realistic. Because the only people that are benefiting from a massive influx of uncontrolled immigrants are the corporatocracy. It's the corporations, it's the CEOs, the CFOs, who can squeeze people, one, through automation, where they're just not needed, and two, employ them on minimum wage or on 0 hours contracts, because there's such a glut of labour that people will be climbing over each other to get these minimum wage or 0 hours jobs. This isn't life, it's slavery. It's slavery. So for the sake of future generations, we really have to get our act together. And like I said, it's not just about June 23rd, it's about what happens afterwards, because I think that the population of this country has got to become more politically active than it's been probably since the 1970s. I mean, this is the mantra today. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple, and of course this is where we're being driven straight into the barcode. Just a number in that barcode. Of course, this is who's being driven by. It was the Rockefeller Foundation, and particularly its genetics and transhumanism agenda has been around since the early part of the 1900s, so this is an agenda that's over 100 years old. And of course the Coudenhove-Kalergi philosophy rides on the back of the Rockefeller genetics and transhumanism agenda. So, like I said, what is happening here with real change, and real change is, I think, a little over a year old now, and I think it's a fundamental, it's community activism. And this is what the establishment doesn't like. It doesn't like community activism, particularly community activism that doesn't appear to have a structure, because the establishment know very well how to infiltrate hierarchical structures, and they will do so. All NGOs are infiltrated. All NGOs are effectively little more than controlled opposition. Community activist groups are a different ballgame. Particularly, obviously when you're focusing on things that are relevant to your community. And within the inner city communities, obviously a common denominator right now is undoubtedly homelessness. And it's a great place to start, and then from that, I'm sure other things will manifest. So I think, my hat is off to Jason and everyone that's been working with Jason on Real Change, and so I think it's got some serious legs. I'd love to see a Real Change group in every community, particularly every inner city community around the country. And then as people start to realise that by getting involved they can make a real difference, then I think we start to see real change, real political change, and we start to see the people taking back the country from the corrupt parasites that are destroying it for us and for future generations. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. Right, okay. Time's sort of like moving very, very quickly. We've got obviously the last speaker for today, which is the one and only Del Henry. Del, come on then up.